Edwards, the coffee with the extra flavor lift, brings you Night Editor. Night Editor, starring Hal Burdick, in tonight's story from back of the headlines titled Lucky Day.
Joe felt his body go cold, his knees weakening under him. Someone had come up behind him silently and touched him on the arm. The police officer. He'd seen Joe pick up the wallet and let him go far enough to establish his guilt. And when they checked his record with 5 years of prison written on it, he wouldn't have a chance. By one foolish act, he'd ended every hope this day had brought him.
Well, this has been a very busy evening around the newsroom. So busy that the final home edition is being put to bed before Bobby, Hal's assistant, has a chance to relax. Now he leaves his desk and strolls over to the little office in the corner, and there he goes.
Oh, come on in, Bobby. Yeah, rest your hands and face.
Oh, brother and will I. This has been one humdinger of a night, Hal. We didn't even get out for coffee.
Well, there's a nice big jar of Edwards in that package on my desk, but you needn't look at it, hopefully. It's an anniversary present for some friends of mine.
Anniversary? Now, look, Hal, that's a new one. I've heard of wood and paper and gold and silver and all that, but a coffee anniversary.
No, not a wedding anniversary, Bob. I guess you'd call it the anniversary of a lucky day.
What on earth are you talking about, Hal?
Oh, a certain day in the life of a friend of mine in which, well, in a way, 2 cups of coffee were sort of symbolic.
All right, boss, all right. Don't stop there. For goodness sake, go on.
Well, I guess Joe Clark wouldn't mind if I told you about it. Though it isn't a story that's generally known.
When you say so, I can be a clam about one of your yarns.
Goes back several years, Bobby. Back to Joe Clark's lucky day. To that late afternoon when he walked along a busy street happier than he thought he ever could be. His head was high. His eyes were lighted by an inner confidence. After these past years of despair and doubt, he was on the upgrade once again. Oh, sure. He only had $1.14 in his pocket. Have to last him several days, too. But he'd learned how to make a very little money go a long way. And tomorrow he started on his new job as a junior bookkeeper in the accounting department of a big oil company. This was his lucky day. There was one faint shadow across his happiness. He'd been vague about references, but the chief accountant had hired him after questioning him about his knowledge of the work. And someday when they knew him and trusted him and believed in him, he'd tell them the story of his 5 years in prison. There was only one thing more that could make his happiness complete. Margaret Brandt. Madge, he used to call her when they were kids growing up together in the wrong side of the tracks section of the city. Of course, she must have been married long since. Maybe to Pinky Dahlman. The smile left his lips for a moment, then came back again. He wasn't going to let himself believe Madge would ever marry Pinky. And one day when he got himself established, he'd look for her, find her somewhere. And then there she was, coming down the street toward him. Joe couldn't believe it at first. It was instinct more than reason that made him call out her name and reach out to grab her by the arm. And even when he pulled her out of the sidewalk crowd and into the shelter of a building entrance, he still thought that he must be dreaming. Oh, Madge. Gee, Madge, is it really you? The one person I wanted most to see? Well, that's just what I'm thinking about you, Joe. They talked excitedly for several minutes, asking questions, interrupting one another. Then a quick silence fell between them. It was Joe who broke it. I forgot. Maybe you'd rather not be seen standing here talking to an ex-con. There were soft gray lights in her eyes as she looked at him. Do you think for a minute I ever believed you were guilty, Joe? Everyone else did. I knew it was a frame-up by Pinky Dahlman and the rest of the gang that grew up around him in our neighborhood. They hated you because you were honest and wouldn't be one of them. And do you believe that, Madge? Believe that I never had $1 or a dime or a nickel or a penny that wasn't mine? Once again, her eyes and her smile gave him his answer. Oh, Madge, this is the luckiest day of my life. I didn't believe the world could be so swell. I think it's a pretty swell world, too, Joe. Look, we can't talk here, and, there are a million things I want to say to you. How about having dinner with me? I can't think of anything I'd love a tenth as much. He was suddenly aware of the $1.14 in his pocket. He'd have to do something about that. He fumbled in his mind for an answer, then... Listen, Madge, I've got an appointment with a man, and, it's a little after 5 o'clock now. Meet me right here at 6. And, gee, Madge, please don't be late. A couple of blocks away, he stopped. Only one course open to him, panhandling. He didn't like it, never had done it. Still, there was nothing dishonest about it. And he had to keep that dinner date with Madge. It could mean everything to him. He chose the big commuting terminal. The racetrack crowds would be coming back. Those people might be more amenable to a touch. Just $2 or $3 would do it. And some way in his life, he'd make up for it. He moved on into the terminal and stood by a magazine stand, sharply aware of his own discomfort, of his dislike for this sort of thing. Aware, too, of the terminal police officer who strolled by him and on toward the street exit. Somehow, the presence of a policeman heightened his distaste for what he was about to do. A heavy-set man, one of the last from the racetrack train, edged up beside him, asked for some cigars. Joe saw the billfold he opened, fat with currency. Well, maybe this was the place to begin. As Joe moved closer, the man was taking cigars from the box with one hand and tucking the billfold in his hip pocket with the other. Joe opened his mouth to speak to him, but the words froze on his lips. The billfold hadn't gone into the pocket. It had slipped on down to the floor, and the man, unaware of it, was turning away and heading for the exit. Joe bent over, picked it up, straightened. The man was several feet away, joining a friend, and no one had seen. Before he realized it, Joe was slipping the wallet into his coat pocket and hurrying in the other direction to a distant, deserted corner of the terminal. He stood there alone, trembling. What was it he said to Madge about never having $1 or a dime or a penny that wasn't rightfully his? And here he was, practically stealing another man's purse. But, no, wait. Maybe there was something lucky in all this, too. There must be close to 1,000 in that billfold, and there was an identification card. Suppose he took as little as $5, then mailed the wallet to the man with an unsigned note, explaining everything and promising to repay the $5 as soon as he could. After all, hadn't fate given him this break when he needed it? Wasn't it for Madge and him, and a world that could be better because of their meeting? Oh, sure. It wouldn't be anything dishonest. Just borrowing. He'd pay it back. Why, within a week he'd... Joe felt his body go cold, his knees weakening under him. Someone had come up behind him silently and touched him on the arm. The officer. He'd seen and let Joe go far enough to establish his guilt. And when they checked his record, he wouldn't have a chance. By one foolish act, his hope for a comeback, all that his meeting with Madge might have meant, was ended. He turned slowly, sick with dread. Then his eyes rounded with surprise. It wasn't the officer who was standing there. It was a short, thin-faced man with sharp, beady eyes, pasty complexion, a narrow slit of a mouth. There was a moment of silence. Then Joe's voice was exploding. Pinky Dolman. Yeah. Huh. What do you know if it ain't my old pal Joe Clark? No pal of yours, Dolman. And if you're smart, you'll get out of my sight before I break that weasel frame of yours into small pieces and kick him out into the street. Oh, now, is that any way to talk to one of the old neighborhood gang, Joe? Yeah, a gang that framed an innocent guy into 5 years of prison. Nest of rats is a better term for it. Well, if it makes you feel any better, I just got through doing a 3-year stretch myself. They should have kept you there for life. As long as you're free to move around, decent people aren't safe. Oh, now, listen, Joe. Let's say we go to some place where we can talk about the old crowd, huh? Yeah, Maggie Brandt. You remember her? Joe's hand shot forward, fastened on the other man's coat lapels, half lifting him from the floor. You keep away from Madge, you understand? If you ever see her, don't speak, or I'll... Pinky shook himself free of the grasp, searching Joe's face with narrowed eyes, his lips curled back in a smirking grin. Huh. Yeah. Couldn't be. You've seen her, could it? Yeah, and couldn't be pal Joe is listening for the wedding bells with a nice job someplace. Someplace where they don't know you're an ex-con. The curl of the lips widened. Ha! I guessed it, didn't I? Yeah, maybe I better keep an eye on you, Joe. I thought I was hitting a stranger for a touch when I came up behind you, but maybe it's better than that. Could be I found myself a meal ticket for keeping my mouth shut. A red haze was forming in front of Joe Clark's eyes. Pinky had picked a winner out of thin air, and he was clever enough to do what he said. Trail Joe, find out about Madge, find out about the new job. Spoil every hope Joe had. The urge to kill was kindling within him. He looked away and through the red haze saw the distant figure of the police officer. Joe's eyes darted back to the sallow face. His smile was hard, bitter. Look, what I ought to do is strangle you, but that wouldn't settle anything. There's only one language you understand. Only one way to keep you from ruining my life a second time. He took the billfold from his pocket, opened it. I've just had a lucky break. Every cent of it is yours if you'll get out of town as fast as you can and never come back. Pinky's eyes rounded as Joe fanned the currency. Mr. Man, and have you got a roll? 50s I see, and 10s and 20s. Well, there must be close to $1,000. All yours if you'll get out of town tonight. Is it a deal? A deal? For a payoff like that, I'll go so far you couldn't find me with one of those big telescopes. Oh, this is swell of you, Joe. I wouldn't have believed you'd do it. Joe crammed the billfold into Pinky's inside coat pocket. Now, get going fast. I might change my mind. Joe watched the ratty little figure as it scurried toward the exit to the street. His smile broadened. He was free of Pinky Dahlman forever. Oh, sure. He still had only that $1.14 in his pocket, and he'd have to hurry to keep his date with Madge. But Madge would understand. Madge wouldn't care any more than he would that dinner would be coffee and donuts. Just one thing to be done first. At police headquarters an hour later, the patrol captain looked up at the terminal detail officer beside his desk. Oh, congratulations on grabbing that pickpocket, Frank. The owner has identified the purse. Nothing missing. Oh, good. Yeah, the record shows the bird who lifted it is one Pinky Dahlman. Got an Eastern prison record. As a 2-time loser, he'll get plenty. Well, when it comes right down to it, there's no congratulations due me, Captain. I wouldn't have known about it if some nice-looking young fella hadn't come hurrying up to me and reported he saw this bird Pinky lifting the leather from some gentleman's hip pocket. Yeah, pointed him out crossing the street. I took after him, and when I caught him and frisked him, there it was in the inside pocket where the lad said I'd find it. Yeah? And what happened to the young fellow who tipped you off, Frank? Now, that I don't know, Captain. I told him to wait, but he said something about having an important engagement. When I got this Pinky back across the street, he was gone. But from the looks of him, I'd say he wasn't the kind to wait around, see if there was a reward. Maybe, the officer smiled. Maybe he had a date with his best girl and didn't want to keep her waiting.
It's going to be a lucky day for you, too, folks, when you discover the delicious extra flavor lift in Edwards coffee. But believe me, there'll be no luck as to why Edwards gives you this extra richness of flavor and aroma. You see, Edwards coffee is custom blended and roasted under Mr. Dwight Edwards' own personal supervision. Every pound blended from the choicest Central and South American coffee beans, quality selected for size, shape, and color, and roasted by the controlled thermal process which develops all the rich, natural coffee flavor. Yes, and to capture this full, delicious flavor and keep it really fresh for you, Edwards coffee is ground for you right at your grocer's. Make no mistake, when you enjoy Edwards coffee, you enjoy the richest, most delicious coffee it's possible to produce. Try a pound, won't you? Your money will be refunded if you don't agree that Edwards coffee gives you an extra flavor lift. Edwards coffee is featured at all Safeway stores. Well, now we've just time for a word about next week's story. What's ahead for us then, Hal?
It's the strange story of Oberleutnant Franz Kazel, who found a way to escape the penalty for his crimes as head of a big prison camp, but in the very moment of his success was trapped by the one weakness in his armor of confidence in himself. It's titled Yesterday's Glory, and I think it's a dramatically intense yarn that you'll all like. Good night.
Be with us next week at this same time when the Roar of the Presses introduces another thrilling night editor story starring Hal Burdick. This is Bill Baldwin saying good night for Edwards Coffee.